This ain't about hair. This is about power disguised as professionalism. And who gets to decide what respectable looks like? In the solemn halls of the U.S. Senate, beneath the marble and murmurs, a quiet war festers. Not the kind etched into legislation or broadcast on CS-PAN. No, this is a war fought in looks, in coded language, in whispered mockery when the cameras pan away. A war that doesn't name itself but wounds just the same. And today it takes aim at the crown of a black woman. A senator leans too close, forgets, or perhaps never cared, that his mic is still hot. He smirks. He speaks. He doesn't shout because he doesn't have to. His insult cuts quieter than law but sharper than policy. That hair. And she thinks she can talk policy? It's a throwaway comment, a dismissal, a dog whistle. And in that moment, centuries of racial bias, respectability politics, and systemic prejudice come crashing down on a single strand. He doesn't know what's coming. He doesn't see the storm sitting just 3 chairs away. Because what he meant to humiliate will soon go viral. What he thought was a joke will become legislation. And what he whispered in private will be heard by a nation. Because when you come for a black woman's presence, her power, her pride, you better hope the mic's off. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Before we get too deep, tap like and subscribe if stories like this keep you up thinking. And if you're watching right now, drop your state and the time you're tuning in. We want to know who's still awake with us. Dim the lights, turn down the world. This is where the silence breaks. It was supposed to be a routine hearing. Another day of policy posturing in the U.S. Senate. Another panel on infrastructure proposals with a focus on broadband expansion in underserved communities. An issue with far-reaching impact, but little room for headlines. The chamber was dressed in its usual calm, stern faces, polished shoes, filtered sunlight glancing off wood-paneled walls. Staffers scrolled through notes. Cameras were rolling, but the energy was low, performative. Until a mic picked up a whisper it wasn't supposed to. The voice belonged to Senator Tom Cotton, Arkansas Republican. Leaning over to his colleague, who didn't respond, only twitched slightly at the corner of his mouth, Cotton made a comment barely above a breath. That hair. And she thinks she can talk policy? The sound was crisp, crystal. It slipped through the chamber's audio system like a drop of oil on white silk. For half a second, no one moved. The sentence didn't ring like a gaffe. It rang like a truth he thought he could say without consequence. A sentiment dressed in sarcasm, but soaked in supremacy. The C-SPAN microphones caught it. Every feed running live had just aired it. And though his voice was quiet, the implication thundered through every inch of that chamber. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett sat still. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't blink. But in her stillness was intention. Her silence wasn't submission, it was surveillance. She let the room feel its own discomfort before she claimed the air back for herself. The insult hadn't landed because it couldn't, not when the woman it aimed to reduce had long since fortified herself against that kind of venom. But others heard it too. A black staffer near the chamber doors paused mid-step. A Latina aide checking committee notes suddenly looked up. Even Senator Booker's brow furrowed slightly as he glanced toward the corner of the room. Jasmine's presence was deliberate that day. She wore a deep emerald pantsuit, tailored, commanding. Her hair, a soft crown of coiled curls, shaped with care and confidence. Nothing about her presence asked for permission. And that was what Tom Cotton couldn't stomach. Because this wasn't about hair. It never was. It was about what her hair represented in that space. It was about history, identity, the unspoken rule that in order to be taken seriously in politics, black women had to bend, straighten, conform. Not just their voices or ideas, but their very appearance. It was about every time a black girl was sent home from school for wearing locks. Every job interview where a black man's afro was called unprofessional. Every moment a black woman in power was called angry for speaking facts too confidently. Cotton's remark carried all of that, wrapped in mockery, disguised as casual critique. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every word now sat under the shadow of what had just been said. The moderator shuffled his papers more nervously. A few Republicans looked visibly agitated, not because of what was said, but because it was heard. Jasmine still hadn't spoken, but her silence was now the loudest thing in the room, as Senator Cotton took the floor to deliver his remarks on the economic necessity of prioritizing rural broadband for hardworking American families. His cadence was rehearsed, but his eyes flicked toward Jasmine more than once. There was a new unease in his voice, a tremor that hadn't been there before. He knew the mic had caught him. He knew the clip would spread. But what he didn't yet know, what no one in that room could predict, was what Jasmine Crockett would do next. She wasn't just going to respond, she was going to shift the frame entirely. No outrage, no shouting, no playing into the caricature they'd quietly built for her. What was coming wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a reckoning, a strategic, legislative, cultural reckoning. And at that moment, surrounded by decorum, cameras, and colleagues who had spent years underestimating her, Jasmine Crockett sat poised, regal, still. She wasn't just listening. She was measuring every syllable, every fidget, every eye that avoided hers. She watched who shifted in their seat, who pretended not to hear, who whispered behind raised hands. And she cataloged it all, not with spite, but with the precision of someone who had walked into rooms like this before and knew exactly how to reclaim them. Because for women like her, these insults are never just insults. They're data, they're evidence, they're proof of the rot still woven into the woodwork of American power. And the next time she speaks, it won't be to defend her hair. It'll be to expose their history. The next morning, the headlines danced delicately around the controversy. Hot mic moment sparks tension in Senate hearing. Comment on colleague's appearance draws scrutiny. Was it a misstep or microaggression? But for Senator Tom Cotton, it wasn't a moment to apologize. It was a moment to double down. Standing before a press gaggle just outside the Capitol, he chuckled when asked about the incident. "Listen," he said, brushing a speck from his suit sleeve. "People are way too sensitive these days. I made a comment. Big deal. I didn't say anything racial. I was referring to decorum. Professionalism. You know, the standard we all try to uphold here." He smiled like he thought he'd won. Like the word decorum could sanitize the disdain behind it. Like centuries of coded attacks on Black identity could be rebranded as just taste. But inside the Senate chamber, his tone sharpened. He took the floor later that day not to address his words, but to pivot them into a platform. And in doing so, he launched a full assault, not just on Jasmine Crockett, but on every Black woman who dared to walk into power looking like herself. "There is a growing trend," he began, "of individuals in positions of leadership who think appearance no longer matters. That somehow how you present yourself is irrelevant to how seriously you're taken." He paused, his eyes glancing just slightly in Jasmine's direction. "Let me be clear. This isn't about race," he said, the classic preamble to every dog whistle. "It's about professionalism. You wouldn't wear a hoodie to a courtroom. You wouldn't wear a grill to a funeral. And frankly, you shouldn't come into the people's chamber looking like you just walked out of a rap video." A murmur rippled through the room. There it was. The coded language sharpened. Hoodie, grill, rap video. All shorthand for not white enough, not safe enough, not one of us, and worst of all, not worthy. He wasn't done. "I have immense respect for my colleagues across the aisle," Cotton continued, "but we must not let this chamber descend into the aesthetics of the inner city. This is not a place for personal expression. It's a place for public service." Inner city, another word that never quite means geography. It means Black. It means poor. It means the other. And still, Jasmine did not speak. She listened. She watched as some of her colleagues nodded, others squirmed. She noticed how one aide typed quickly, likely issuing a press release trying to soften the blow. She saw a young Black woman in the upper gallery swallow hard, then sit up straighter. Cotton's attack was not just personal. It was strategic, a performance for a base that feeds on the illusion of traditional values. As long as traditional means white, male, and unquestioned. And then came the pivot, his attempt to paint himself not as aggressor, but protector. I grew up around folks who worked hard, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, didn't expect special treatment, he said. They didn't think they had to wear their culture like a costume just to make a point. They came here to work. Bootstraps. The myth, the lie, the suggestion that equality was a matter of effort and that any deviation was laziness. He was laying the groundwork to dismiss Jasmine's very existence in that chamber as a political stunt. He grinned again, resting his hand on the podium like a man pleased with his own eloquence. But if you show up in a taxpayer-funded office looking like a super predator from the 90s, don't expect people to treat you like you're here to govern. There it was, not even hidden now. Super predator, the old Clinton-era racial slur dressed as policy. And Jasmine still did not speak. She closed her notebook, folded her hands, raised her eyes, not to him, but beyond him. Because she'd seen this before. She'd read it in textbooks, heard it in courtrooms, felt it in job interviews. She'd lived through the stares, the questions, the quiet assumptions. She knew what it looked like when someone tried to disguise their fear of her brilliance as concern for professionalism. She didn't need to defend her hair. She was preparing to defend every child sent home for theirs. Because this wasn't just one attack. This was the echo of centuries, a man in a pressed Navy suit trying to protect a world that always placed comfort above truth, respectability above reality, image above justice. And Jasmine Crockett, Black Congresswoman, constitutional lawyer, daughter of a movement, was preparing to flip the script. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't afraid. She was methodical. And what was coming next would not be a rebuttal. It would be reconstruction. Jasmine Crockett had been underestimated before. It came with the territory. Being a Black woman in politics meant carrying the weight of two histories, the silencing of women and the criminalization of Blackness. But she had never worn either as a wound. She wore them as armor. When Senator Cotton unleashed his speech, the veiled slurs, the coded language, the full-throated disdain, Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't shift in her seat or glance toward the cameras like a person caught in a scandal. She sat upright, composed, her fingers laced loosely on the desk in front of her. She'd learned a long time ago that silence, when wielded right, can be louder than a shout. Because in Washington, noise was currency, and everyone spent it like it was going out of style. Cotton's outburst wasn't spontaneous. It was a performance. A dog whistled to his base. A sermon to the choir of those who feared losing control over the meaning of professional, respectable, and American. But Jasmine wasn't here to play in his theater. She was here to rewrite the script. In her office that evening, the air was thick with restraint. The blinds were drawn. A single lamp glowed gold against the dusk. Her phone buzzed in rhythmic bursts. Notifications, mentions, reporters requesting comment. Her staff was tense but ready. They'd seen what happened. But more importantly, they knew her. She didn't yell. She didn't rage. Instead, she pulled out a folder. Worn edges, highlighted sections, legal annotations in blue and black ink. On the cover, one word, Crown, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair, a bill she had championed long before this incident ever occurred. Born in the States, pushed through by grassroots organizers and legal scholars, the Crown Act sought to ban discrimination based on hair texture and protective styles in workplaces and schools. It wasn't just policy, it was personal. She'd carried the trauma of hair codes since childhood, watching friends forced to straighten their curls before picture day, hearing stories of young boys suspended for wearing braids, seeing Black professionals told to look cleaner if they wanted a promotion. The attack from Cotton was nothing new. It was the system simply saying what it always believed, only this time, out loud. As the sun set over Capitol Hill, Jasmine wasn't preparing a tweet. She was preparing a reckoning. She called her legal team, reviewed the legislative language again, updated the examples with current incidents, including several recent cases of hair-based terminations in Georgia and North Carolina, states where no such protections existed yet. She included a 2023 ruling from the 11th Circuit where a court upheld an employer's right to deny a job to a Black woman because of her dreadlocks, citing that federal law did not yet explicitly prohibit such actions. EEOC Barnum's catastrophe, Taihanyo Sol's 2016. That was the crack in the system, and Jasmine was about to pour daylight through it. The next morning, she met with her comms director. No press conference, she said calmly. Not yet. Then what? Her aide asked. Jasmine smiled, not a smirk, a knowing kind of stillness. We let them talk. Let the media chew on Cotton's super predator soundbite a bit longer. Let people share it, break it down, feel the insult, let it burn. And then we bring the receipts. She walked into the next committee hearing with a file in her hands and fire in her chest. Same emerald suit, same unapologetic curls, but now the silence had weight. The cameras followed her more closely. Some senators nodded politely, unsure of what she would say, if anything. Cotton glanced up briefly, a flicker of tension behind his eyes. But Jasmine still didn't speak. Not yet, because she knew the game. The press would expect an emotional reaction. Social media would crave a fiery clip. But she didn't come to make headlines. She came to make history. Back in her office, she ran through the documents again, re-verified the case studies, highlighted the statistical disparities, how Black women are 1.5 times more likely to be sent home from school for hair-related violations, how nearly 80% of Black women feel they must change their natural hair to succeed professionally. Data from Dove Crown Research Study 2021. She printed it all, not just for the hearing, but for every office in the building. If Cotton wanted to talk about standards, she was going to ask who wrote them and who they excluded. That night, her team met one last time. Jasmine was calm, not cold, centered. We're not going to fight like they expect, she said. We're going to legislate. We're going to educate. And we're going to make it damn clear. This ain't about my hair. It's about your fear. No one in the room said a word. They didn't need to. The storm was coming, and this time it was wearing coils. 3 days had passed since Senator Cotton's insult echoed across the Senate floor. 3 days of talking heads dissecting every syllable. 3 days of media outlets running both sides' coverage while quietly cropping Jasmine out of headlines. 3 days of was it racist? Debates on morning shows hosted by people who'd never had to choose between their identity and their job. But Jasmine Crockett had not said a word. Until now, it was a Wednesday morning. The chamber was fuller than usual, unusually quiet. Even those who had nothing to do with the scheduled hearing on broadband legislation had shown up, because they knew what was about to happen. Jasmine sat in her usual seat, composed, the same emerald suit, same crown of curls that had become an unspoken symbol in the past 72 hours. The nation was watching now, not for her outrage, but for her answer. And when the time came, she stood. No introduction, no clearing of the throat, just a voice, calm, deliberate, and razor sharp. I wasn't going to address the comments made in this chamber last week. I was raised to believe dignity is sometimes best expressed in silence. But then I remembered, my silence doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to every little Black girl who's ever been told to tame herself to be taken seriously. A pause, the room stiffened. So let me begin by stating, for the record, my hair is not a costume, it's not a distraction, and it's definitely not a disqualification. Now the room was listening, and Jasmine, she was just getting started. She lifted the folder in her hand. This, she said, is the Crown Act, creating a respectful and open world for natural hair. This is legislation that makes it illegal to discriminate against someone in employment or education based on hair texture or protective hairstyles commonly associated with race. She opened the folder and began reading. Section 2, Paragraph A. In a society where hair has been used as a tool of racial expression and, in turn, oppression, denying individuals opportunities based on natural or protective hairstyles constitutes a form of racial discrimination. Then she looked up, straight into Senator Cotton's eyes. You said this chamber should not descend into the aesthetics of the inner city. I say this chamber should not rise on the backs of coded bigotry. Silence. She turned a page. You said people should pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And yet, Black women are 80% more likely to alter their natural hair to meet workplace expectations than white women? Is it really about effort, or is it about making us invisible unless we imitate you? She let the question hang. Cotton didn't respond. He didn't look at her now. She continued, "You invoked professionalism, Senator. But tell me, how is it professional to whisper insults into a hot mic? How is it professional to call a colleague a super predator on live television? How is it professional to demand assimilation instead of acknowledging equity?" Gasps, audible ones. Some senators shifted in their chairs. Others looked down at their phones, knowing that the clips were already being clipped. The headlines were already being written. Jasmine walked toward the lectern, not with fire, but with purpose. "I have here," she said, holding up another document, "testimony from a 14-year-old black boy in Texas, suspended from school because his locks touched his collar. A woman in Georgia who was fired from a customer service job because her braids were deemed unprofessional. A 6th grade girl in Florida whose photo was removed from her yearbook because she wore an Afro puff." She placed the testimonies on the table in front of her. "These aren't anecdotes. They are data. They are lives. They are our children." She turned to face the full chamber. "I did not come here to perform. I came here to legislate justice. If my presence, my voice, or my hair offends you, then maybe the problem isn't how I show up. Maybe the problem is who this chamber was built for in the first place." Now it wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. Cotton leaned forward, his jaw locked, his face tight with restrained anger. For a moment, it looked like he might speak, but all he managed was a whisper, low and sharp, "Shut up your mouth." It was barely audible, but the mics caught it. Again, the moment ricocheted across the chamber like shattered glass. A senator, cornered by truth, had just lost control of his composure. Again. And this time, there was no defense. Jasmine didn't even turn toward him. She didn't have to. She picked up the Crown Act one last time. "This is not about my hair. This is about whether blackness must be erased to be accepted, whether dignity must be diluted to be heard, and whether justice will ever extend to the roots, literally, of who we are." She set the folder down, firm. "I move that we bring the Crown Act forward for full committee consideration." There was no applause, not yet, but in the stillness that followed, you could feel it. Power was shifting, not just in that room, but across every screen, every school, every barbershop and salon where people were watching and whispering. She said it. She did it. She came for him with facts, not fury, and now he was the one exposed. At first, he tried to laugh it off. "Look, folks get heated. I misspoke," Cotton told a reporter in the Capitol hallway later that day. "It's politics. Emotions run high." But the footage had already spread. The video, clipped and captioned in bold font, "Shut up your mouth," circulated like wildfire. Not just on political Twitter, but on Instagram Reels, TikTok, Facebook groups full of teachers, barbers, single mothers, and law students. The comment wasn't just condescending. It was a command, a white senator telling a black woman, mid-session, to shut up as she was speaking truth. The backlash came quickly. At first it was subtle. A few senators avoided eye contact in the hallway, staffers whispering by coffee machines. A former Republican press aide tweeted, "This is indefensible, period." But Cotton, he went on offense. He showed up the next morning on a conservative talk show. "This is all theater. I said what I said in a moment of frustration. But the real issue here is that Congresswoman Crockett is trying to divide us, using race, gender, whatever card she can play, to push an extreme left agenda. She's the one making this personal." The host nodded, tight-lipped, but even she seemed uncomfortable. Cotton didn't notice, or didn't care. Later that afternoon, he took the Senate floor again. This time, his remarks were less polished. The swagger was still there, but something beneath it was fraying. "I'm being painted as some kind of villain for defending standards," he began. "But what's really happening is that the left wants to redefine professionalism to suit their politics, to let activist lawmakers dress like TikTok influencers and call it representation." He smirked, waited for a laugh. None came. "They want to say this is about hair? Come on. This is about turning every difference into a grievance, every critique into a crime. If I say something about style, suddenly I'm a white supremacist? Now it wasn't just about Jasmine. He was flailing at the air, grasping for outrage. And then came the shift, from defense to projection. Let's be honest, if I made comments like she did, accusing people of systemic racism, throwing around accusations like confetti, I'd be the one called divisive. I'd be censured. But because she's black, she gets a pass. She can say whatever she wants and play victim when people push back. There it was. He wasn't denying the insult. He wasn't addressing the language. He was accusing her of racism, of reverse discrimination, of being the real problem. He was turning himself into the victim. The truth is, he said, this has nothing to do with justice. It's about guilt, about punishing people for being successful, for being white, for having built something that others now want to tear down and replace with cultural chaos. Cultural chaos. The same phrase was used decades ago by segregationists who opposed school integration. The same fear dressed in new clothes, that inclusion was erased, that representation was rebellion. And then he slipped. If we keep letting these people redefine America in their image, we won't have a country left. These people, 2 words, one mask torn clean off. Backstage, his staff was in quiet panic, phones blowing up, donors texting things like, "Not great optics." One advisor whispered, "You need to walk this back." But Cotton doubled down. He went live on Facebook that evening with a shaky webcam and a too-tight tie. "The woke mob is coming after me because I dared to speak the truth," he said, voice strained. "But let me tell you something. They're not going to cancel me. I'm not scared of some leftist congresswoman trying to start a hair revolution." That clip, too, went viral. Hair revolution. It was meant as mockery. It became a rallying cry. People printed it on shirts. Memes flooded in. Jasmine's calm face next to his red, furious one. Side-by-sides of the face of a movement versus the face of a meltdown. And the more Cotton spoke, the worse it got. He went on radio shows, cable news, podcasts, each time trying a new strategy. "She twisted my words." It was taken out of context. This is really about Marxism. Each version dug the hole deeper. Because America wasn't just watching anymore. It was remembering. Remembering every time a black woman was told to calm down when she raised her voice. Every time a white man interrupted, dismissed, or demeaned and got away with it. Every time respectability was used as a noose. And now, finally, the noose was slipping. But not around Jasmine's neck. In a closed-door caucus meeting, one Republican senator quietly said, "He's becoming a liability." Others nodded. The Whisper network turned. One by one, donors pulled quiet funding. Journalists stopped writing alleged. And behind the scenes, even Cotton's own aides started circulating resumes. The crack was no longer invisible. It was growing. And at the center of it all, a congresswoman who hadn't raised her voice once. At first, the response split clean down the middle. On one side, right-wing media circled the wagons. They called her dramatic, opportunistic, said she was weaponizing identity for political gain. Talk show hosts pulled still images of Jasmine mid-sentence, froze her expression, then mocked her voice and cadence. They described her as loud, unruly, typical of that progressive ghetto mindset. One even said, "If she wants to be taken seriously, maybe don't show up looking like a hood rat in a courtroom." That word, hood rat, set off its own firestorm. But they knew what they were doing. It wasn't about arguing facts. It was about protecting the image of what power has always looked like, white, male, and manicured. They brought on pundits who'd never heard of the Crown Act but were suddenly experts on workplace attire. They dug up old photos of Jasmine from marches and protests, called her a radical, and said she was dividing America by hair texture. But the other side had receipts and a much bigger megaphone. Black Twitter was on fire. Clips of Jasmine's speech were reposted with captions like, "This ain't just about hair, this is about visibility." She didn't raise her voice once and still dismantled that man. "Y'all told us to be professional." She was, and you still called her ghetto. TikTok creators, lawyers, educators, even stylists began stitching the video explaining the legal implications of hair discrimination, the deep history behind Eurocentric standards in American professionalism. One creator said, "This is why we need the Crown Act, because whiteness has always been the default. And the moment we show up as ourselves, they feel threatened." And then came the shift. It wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every black woman who'd ever straightened her hair for a job interview, about every black man who was told his locks looked aggressive, about every school photo day that ended with tears and a hot comb. Teachers spoke out. Corporate leaders issued statements. Barbershops and beauty salons became political organizing spaces overnight. In a small town in Alabama, a high school student named Maya posted a video in her classroom wearing her natural curls for the first time in months. "I saw what Congresswoman Crockett said, and I realized I don't have to hide who I am to be smart, or capable, or enough." That video hit 2.3 million views in 24 hours. Meanwhile, corporate America started to pay attention. Several companies, among them a major coffee chain and a large bank, issued press releases in support of the Crown Act. Their social media teams created graphics. "Professionalism has no texture. We stand with natural hair. We stand with you." Even fashion brands began reposting Jasmine's speech with artistic edits, stylized quotes in bold serif fonts. Overnight, she became not just a political figure, but a cultural symbol. But perhaps the most unexpected turn came from inside the government itself. A group of moderate senators, Democrats and independents, signed a joint letter requesting the Senate Judiciary Committee expedite consideration of the Federal Crown Act. One Republican senator even sent an anonymous statement to Politico. Tom crossed a line, and Jasmine, she crossed a threshold. This moment's bigger than him now. Still, the other side didn't back down. They organized protests outside district offices, created hashtags like #HairOverCountry and #NotMyStandard. In a now infamous cable interview, one conservative strategist said, "If we redefine professionalism every time someone gets offended, we lose the fabric of society." But no matter how loud they got, it didn't land the same. Because America was watching Jasmine stand with composure, facts, and clarity, while the other side screamed about hair as if it threatened national security. Back in Texas, Jasmine's district began holding local town halls, not just about hair, but about racial bias and dress codes, workplace equity, and cultural representation in public spaces. One woman stood up and said, "When I wear my hijab, I'm told it's a distraction. When my daughter wears her fro, she's told it's a disruption. What y'all really afraid of is anything you can't control." And the room, black, brown, Muslim, Asian, stood with her. The shift had happened, quietly at first, then publicly, then loudly. The debate was no longer about one senator's insult. It was about a nation's reflection. And in that mirror, many saw for the first time how deep the roots of conformity ran and how long they'd been bending themselves just to belong. Jasmine Crockett didn't shout, she didn't curse, she didn't threaten. She showed up. She spoke truth. She stayed rooted. And somehow, in the face of power, that was the most radical thing of all. It wasn't planned, not by her team, not by speechwriters, not even by Jasmine herself. It happened in a hallway late afternoon, after back-to-back committee sessions, camera flashes, and a dozen emails from national media outlets begging for exclusives. Jasmine was walking toward an elevator, still in that now iconic emerald suit, her heels clicking a steady rhythm on marble floors. A young black intern jogged up behind her, phone in hand, breathless but polite. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, "quick question, if that's okay." Jasmine turned, smiled gently, tired but present. The intern raised her phone and asked, "What do you want people to understand about all this? The hair, the backlash, the bourgeoisie?" Jasmine paused, not for effect, for clarity. She looked directly into the lens and said, "We're not asking you to accept our hair. We're asking you to respect the people wearing it." 7 seconds, 7 words after the pause. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't fiery. It was truth, distilled. And within an hour, it was everywhere. The clip hit Twitter first, posted by the intern herself. She added the caption, "She didn't blink, she didn't raise her voice, but she made it clear." From there, the video jumped to TikTok, then Instagram, then newsrooms, then everywhere. Edited versions came fast. Jasmine's words over slow motion shots of little girls getting their hair braided. Her quote scrolls across a montage of courtroom wins, protest marches, graduation caps tossed skyward, animations of the sentence being written in chalk on a school blackboard, with the words, "Respect the people," glowing at the end. Within 24 hours, the quote was on t-shirts, mugs, billboard mock-ups, graffiti walls. "We're not asking you to accept our hair. We're asking you to respect the people wearing it." One TikTok creator stitched the clip and said, "That's it. That's the message we've been trying to say for decades. But she said it like it was a sentence we were all born knowing. That's going in history books." But it didn't stop at culture. The sentence hit policy. In New Jersey, a school board fast-tracked the approval of updated grooming policies after local students held a Respect the Crown assembly, playing Jasmine's quote on a loop during morning announcements. In Oregon, a state legislator quoted her on the floor in support of a statewide hair discrimination bill. He ended his speech by saying, "You don't have to be black to understand what dignity looks like, but you do have to be brave to stand up when others won't." Even a Fortune 500 CEO reposted the clip on LinkedIn, adding, "We've reviewed our internal dress code policy this week, and it wasn't neutral, it was colonial. We're making changes." But not all reactions were praise. Some scoffed. One right-wing columnist wrote, "Hair isn't a civil right. These people want to make everything sacred, so they can never be criticized." But that line, "these people," was exactly why Jasmine's quote resonated. Because at its core, the issue was never about style. It was always about who's allowed to be whole in public space, who's allowed to be seen as intelligent while being black, who's allowed to be powerful while being natural, who's allowed to be without having to perform whiteness as a prerequisite for respect. On the fifth day, the quote was projected onto the side of a building in downtown Atlanta. "Respect the people wearing it." Jasmine Crockett, it became a selfie spot, a gathering place, a memorial and a celebration all at once. College students painted it on protest signs. Teachers posted it outside their classrooms. Mothers repeated it to their daughters in the mirror. Even in barbershops between fades and lineups, men nodded and said, "She ain't yell, she ain't cursed. She just told the truth." And Jasmine, she kept working. She didn't chase the virality. She didn't pivot into sound bites. She stayed in session, introducing amendments to expand the language of the Crown Act to include housing, healthcare, and public accommodations. Because she knew that respect, if real, had to reach beyond the workplace. It had to touch every system that ever punished differences. But she did see the clip. Late one night, when most of her team had gone home, she watched it again, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching. "We're not asking you to accept our hair. We're asking you to respect the people wearing it." And for just a moment, she let herself feel it. Not pride exactly, but purpose. Because a sentence had become a symbol, and a whisper once meant to humiliate her had turned into a megaphone for millions. It started in whispers, emails exchanged between policy aides, school board members, HR directors. But within weeks, those whispers became legislation, directives, and mandates. In the wake of Jasmine Crockett's speech, in the 7-second clip that echoed louder than most political campaigns, change began to move through America like a quiet revolution. New York State expanded its version of the Crown Act, adding protections not only in employment and education, but also in healthcare settings, ensuring black patients could no longer be penalized or dismissed for their hair presentation during treatment or intake. Illinois passed a new resolution requiring all public schools to train faculty annually on racialized appearance bias, something that had never been part of teacher credentialing before. California, by the first state to pass the Crown Act years earlier, launched a statewide media campaign with one bold line across buses, subways, and billboards: "Professional has no texture." And in Texas, Jasmine's home district, things got personal. 3 school districts rewrote their grooming policies, directly citing her remarks on the Senate floor. One local principal, who had previously suspended a student for wearing twists, issued a formal apology and asked that student to join a new advisory panel on inclusion. The student's name was Maya. Yes, the same Maya whose TikTok had gone viral weeks earlier. The same girl who, at 14, decided to wear her hair natural again because Jasmine did. When the principal handed her the advisory badge, Maya said, "I'm not here because my hair changed. I'm here because someone made space for me to stop hiding it." In the private sector, a wave of internal audits rocked corporate America. Law firms quietly removed ambiguous grooming clauses from their dress codes. Airlines reviewed their standards for flight attendants. Retail giants updated employee manuals to reflect cultural protections and respect clauses. At a major tech company, a black employee posted anonymously, "Before the Crockett moment, I was debating a perm. Now I walk in every day with my natural twist out, and I feel untouchable. Not because the culture changed, but because I did." That post racked up over 200,000 shares. Universities took notice too. Howard, Spelman, and Morehouse held public symposiums on the politics of appearance and power. Ivy League campuses followed suit. At Harvard Law, a student-led panel titled "Respect the People Wearing It" drew more than 1,000 in-person attendees, double the expected capacity. On stage sat civil rights attorneys, stylists, sociologists, and at the center, Jasmine Crockett beamed in virtually. She ended her remarks with, "If law can be used to oppress identity, then law must also be the tool to protect it." Even Congress wasn't immune to the ripple. When the Federal Crown Act was brought back to the floor, it now had bipartisan momentum, something unthinkable only a month earlier. A Republican senator from Ohio quietly reached out to Jasmine's office, offering his vote if certain business-neutral language could be negotiated. "Not because I agree with everything she said," he admitted, "but because I can't defend what happened. And I watched my granddaughter cry after seeing her classmate get sent home for her braids." That shook me. But the real aftermath, the one no media outlet could fully measure, was internal. In homes, in mirrors, in boardrooms and barbershops. In the way people stood just a little taller. Some women stopped carrying emergency flat irons in their purses. In the way black children walked into classrooms and didn't feel like wearing costumes. A mother in Detroit posted a photo of her daughter before school, curls full and untamed, captioned simply, "Thanks to you, Jasmine, she didn't ask me to fix it today." In Atlanta, a father wrote a letter to Congress. "My son said he wants to be a senator one day." I asked why. He said, "Because Miss Crockett didn't get scared when that man told her to shut up. That's it. That's the America I want to live in." And Jasmine, she kept her head down and her crown up. There were no victory laps, no press tours. She quietly met with legal teams, expanded the language of the Crown Act, prepared for committee challenges, and began building partnerships with state attorneys general who were eager to codify protections locally. She also made one change in her office, a quote stenciled above the conference room doorway. "Presence is protest, and I am here. No dramatics, just truth." The man who told her to shut up? Senator Cotton was now fighting a quiet battle of his own. Rejected speaking engagements, strained donor calls, and whispers that he might be pulled from a key committee chair next term. He had underestimated Jasmine. He had underestimated the microphone. But most of all, he had underestimated the moment. And the moment had become a movement. This wasn't just about a hot mic. It wasn't just about a hairstyle, a hallway insult, or a senator losing his temper in public. This was about what power looks like and who gets to wear it. When Jasmine Crockett stood before that chamber, she didn't just defend herself. She didn't just respond to a slight. She reclaimed space that was never meant for her and made it her own. She held her ground in silence. She answered hate with law. She turned a moment meant to humiliate into a movement that elevated millions. From school dress codes to state legislation, from HR manuals to TikTok captions, from backroom whispers to national headlines. Jasmine's voice didn't just echo, it awakened. She reminded us that justice doesn't always arrive in the form of a ruling or a revolution. Sometimes it walks into a room quietly. dignified, unapologetically itself. Wearing curls that no one can police and speaking truths no one can silence. And in a nation still wrestling with whose presence gets to be called professional, she gave us an answer. We're not asking you to accept our hair, we're asking you to respect the people wearing it. Because respect is not earned through assimilation, it is owed through humanity. And when justice shows up in its full identity, roots and all, you can't ignore it anymore. You see it, you feel it, and if you're lucky, you stand with it. This story is a dramatized and fictionalized account meant to reflect real struggles in modern America. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. Now, before you go, take a breath. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Tap like to help stories like this reach those who need to hear them. Subscribe if you want more narratives that challenge power without chasing spectacle. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit you hardest for you. And share this with someone who still believes the quietest people often carry the deepest truths. Because maybe the next Jasmine Crockett isn't in office yet. Maybe she's just waiting for a sign that her voice matters. Maybe she's watching now. And if she is, we hear you, we see you, and we're not looking away.